Well, welcome back to the Anja Health podcast. Today, I'm super excited to have one of our investors and an amazing parent with us, Cristina Georgoulakis. Yeah, I'd love to have you just sort of introduce yourself and professionally, but also personally. I'd be curious how you sort of identify and see your responsibilities.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be talking to you today. My introduction is actually both personal and professional, which is I'm a first generation American. My mom is Cuban. My dad is Greek, which very much makes up who I am and how I look at the world and interact with it. And then professionally, I've been working in early stage startups for the majority of my career. I've done a little bit of everything. I've been a founder, I've been CX, product, kind of all the different roles that one takes, especially in early stage startups. And then I moved from being an operator into an investor about 3 years ago, which is where Catherine and I met. And I got the pleasure of supporting you as an investor, but also as a user. I'm a mom to two small kids. I want to call them babies still, but two small kids. I have a 3-year-old son and I have a 1-year-old daughter. And I'll tell you, it's been a wild and crazy ride navigating it all.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious what you see your mission in life as both personally and professionally. Like what do you feel like your calling or purpose is?
I luckily have it very clear after doing some deep introspective work. So I strongly believe that every 10 years at a minimum, you should kind of pause and take a look at what you're doing and see how it resonates with you and if you still feel like it's your life's work or not. And for me, I did that just before I started investing. And my life's work is to facilitate growth in people and organizations. And I feel that very strongly for the work that I do every day in the office and at home with my children and my family.
Yeah, I do that every quarter. When I set my business goals, I also set my personal goals.
I love that. I also like to do that and see like the growth areas of and
Yeah.
all the good stuff that comes with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, I'd love to transition into sort of your family planning, and everything like that. So I'm curious what motivated you to have kids in the first place, and were either of them unplanned?
Neither one of them were unplanned. They actually took
Okay.
more planning than I expected. More planning and effort than I had been told my entire life it might take to expand my family. Since I was a little girl, really wanted to be a mother. It's something for me that I didn't know how, I didn't know when, I didn't know what it would necessarily look like, but being a mother was something that was very, very important to me. And it was even so important to me. And I had that aspect of it so clear, not the how, the who, the what, or the with. Even in my early 30s, before I met my husband, or before my husband and I were together, I started thinking to myself, like, hey, if I'm going to do this alone, how would I do that? And what would it look like? Because I just had it very clear that I wanted to be a mom.
Wow, that's super interesting. What avenues were you looking into?
All of them. So I think motherhood and parenthood can look many different ways depending on what's important to you. I really wanted, if possible, to have biological children. So I started thinking about getting my eggs frozen. I started thinking about at what age would I feel I wanted to start that process if I was still single, or even if I was in a relationship, when and where that would take place. But when I was thinking about this, I was single. So I was thinking I was doing single family planning. And then at roughly what ages, how long was I going to wait before I started kind of planning to do things on my own?
Mm.
And just kind of taking those, exploring all the different avenues.
I'm curious what age you felt was sort of like the maximum you would reach before you were going to pursue kind of single parenthood. Because I actually have a few friends that are kind of at this crossroads themselves and are like turning 33 soon. And they're kind of like, maybe I'll give it like another year, but yeah, are thinking about different options.
It's such an interesting thing to be a woman. I feel like you've got this clock ticking, but unfortunately, whether we like it or not, it's kind of our reality to
Mm-hmm.
navigate. And so I am a very data minded person. And for me, that cutoff, so I'd done reading, and that cutoff of 35, like your your likelihood to get pregnant, I can look at actual numbers, but it kind of dips significantly after 35. And then it's the time that it takes naturally for you to have a pregnancy. And I think at 35, it's like anywhere from 6 months to a year, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So when I was thinking about doing it alone, I would have probably, if I had still been single around 33, probably started thinking about freezing my eggs, not necessarily to use them. And again, this is all theoretical, just planning. I probably would have done something at around 37 or 38, even if I was doing it alone.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one person. And I'm more like a planner slash, I knew if I didn't have children, I would really regret it. And so I
Yeah.
was really optimizing for, I know this is very clear to me. So how do I make sure that I leave space for what may happen naturally and organically? And if not, because I know it's so important to me, I'm also going to have a plan in place for myself to make that dream come true for me
Right. Okay.
and hopefully my children, but speaking
Yeah.
before they were created.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of the movie How to Be Single. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah, where her older sister has the kid. So at what age did you meet your husband? And then at that point, like how did you envision your family structure and how did you kind of think about planning from there?
So I actually met my husband at work. We met at Typeform early days. And
Oh,
so I
cool.
knew him, but we weren't together for a while.
Hmm.
But we ended up dating, and I think we got engaged at my 31st,
Oh, wow. Okay, that's
32nd. Actually,
yeah.
I don't know time. Maybe I was 32. I think we got engaged my 32nd birthday. It was great. And also I reverse engineered and was like, okay, I am married or I'm engaged at 32. I want to have a summer wedding
Yeah.
and I want to start having kids like soon-ish. And
Yeah.
again, it's this math that ideally I wouldn't have had to do. Ideally, I could have just been like, joie de vivre, just enjoy life. Not worry about that little clock that's telling me I'm going to have to be concerned or have a geriatric pregnancy, which
Mm.
is just an evil turn of phrasing for women.
Yeah.
So we got married in the same year. I was pregnant with my son at 33 or 34. And then I had my daughter a year ago and I'm 37. So I had my daughter at 36 and I had my son at 34.
So how did you feel when you first found out that you were pregnant with both of them and how did your partner react?
So with my son, it's really funny again, this process of like, you're told your whole life you need to protect yourself from getting pregnant until you're ready. And so
Yeah.
when you start trying, you're like, oh, surely this is gonna, like, I've done so much preparation to prevent this. So the first couple times that I took the test and I wasn't pregnant, I was like, oh man, like what is, and then when I did see I was pregnant, I was excited and horrified all at the same time. And I think my husband was just excited. He was like very,
Oh,
very excited. And I was just like, wow, my life now is going to change in ways that I'm not even aware of. And that's the
yeah.
thing for the person who's carrying the baby is the moment you find out the baby exists, your life changes. You have to eat different things. You have to do different things. Your sleep, like every ounce of your body is impacted and that was a big shift. So that was with my son. I had a miscarriage in between my son and my daughter.
Mm.
So the second time I found out I was pregnant, I was very excited. Also, we took a picture. We did the selfie in the bathroom with the stick. We actually brought my son in the picture and took the picture with him also, even though he didn't know what was going on. And then I had a miscarriage, which was really emotionally and physically draining and exhausting. And so when we got pregnant the third time, and my husband will say this, I didn't let anyone celebrate. There was no celebration. There was until we get past the number of weeks that the drop off is safer, which is about 12 weeks, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to grow attached again and go through that heartache. So it was a very different kind of experience.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how far along were you when you miscarried? The second pregnancy.
No problem. It was early. It was about 9 weeks. And while that is early, attachment that you have to a baby that you feel like you are growing as part of your body, like all of these things, there's a big emotional toll that I think gets sometimes underestimated. And then the whole process of miscarrying is actually can be quite intense.
If you were talking to a parent that had recently miscarried, what advice would you have for them?
One, I would say, I'm so sorry. And your heartache is valid. Your pain is valid. It doesn't matter if it's a week or 10 weeks or 35 weeks, whatever it is. And like everything in life and in parenthood, this is a phase. And the sadness, the feelings might never go away, but they're most intense right now. And it is a phase that it will get easier.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My team and I were talking about this yesterday because we do these onboarding calls with parents after they purchase, and our head of customer experience asked a parent, like, "Oh, is this your first baby? Like, you seem super excited." And she was like, "Well, it's my first baby that I'm like really like giving birth to, but she had like a couple miscarriages before, so she was like, I never know how to answer that." So yeah, we've been talking about it on our team.
Again, my experience is I wish that people had been, or I wish that people feel like they could be more open about both the good and the bad experiences.
Yeah.
Life is full of them. And what I find personally very unhelpful is not hearing these other stories, because the loneliness someone can feel during any of these parts of parenthood can be great. And in sharing a story that someone can connect with and say like, oh, I actually felt that way too, and that's normal. Like, it's actually normal to feel this way. It's 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. And that is 1 in 4 pregnancies that goes past the first week or two. And that's the other piece is, if you're, anyways, there's a lot. It's actually 1 in 50% of pregnancies end in a miscarriage, but it's before it would be recognized as a pregnancy. So that's really common.
Did you feel comfortable sharing it with others? And do you feel like others felt kind of comfortable sharing it with you as well?
So I actually did a tweet thread, which I don't typically do. It helped me cope sharing my story, because I felt very alone and I didn't want anyone to have to feel that loneliness. And that gets perpetuated by people not sharing the hard stuff.
Right.
So I shared a tweet thread and I was blown away with the support, the kindness, and how many Me Too's came back from it, both men and women. I had so many men message me and say that they had suffered the same loss and how painful it was. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, you're actually the first. I mean, maybe a past guest just didn't want to speak on it, but you're the first guest that we've had to speak on it. So I appreciate that. Cool. Well, I'd love to talk about kind of your pregnancies that did go to term and just thinking about your birth plan. So, yeah, how did you kind of go about making your birth plan? What were you particularly intentional about? Did you have any like particular opinions that you felt really strongly about? And I'm also curious, between your first and second births, how your opinions may have changed.
I'm a very diligent student. So when I'm learning something new or when I'm taking on something new, I like to learn absolutely everything possible. It makes me feel more prepared and more knowledgeable. And so I did that. both times with both of my pregnancies that I took to term. And both times I worked with a doula. So my first pregnancy, I I had a doula that would come to our house and lead us in education sessions. She did
Mm,
about 5 sessions with us in person, and it was wildly informative. And they were like 4-hour sessions. So we had
yeah.
our notebooks, we were learning about the placenta, we were learning about positions, we were learning about like eye ointment and the pros and cons of it. Things that I was like, oh, I am so naive in the world of pregnancy. And I appreciated our doula really leading the conversation with, let's look at the pros and cons to all the decisions that you make up until birth and then
Yeah.
beyond, not beyond kind of the first couple months of birth, but even at that point. And so my first son was born May 20th, 2020, which was deep COVID days.
Oh, yeah.
So we had I think it was 4 in-person sessions with our doula, and then everything went on Zoom.
Oh, wow.
And then my last trimester was when we were wiping down groceries, we were spraying it with Lysol, leaving it in the hallway.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, as a very pregnant woman who's already dealing with a ton of anxiety, throwing a pandemic in the mix was not very helpful. And then also, we had to navigate, could my husband be in the room with me or
Mm,
not? It was clear that my doula could not be,
yeah.
which was really tough for me because I had chosen a doula because I wanted to have the emotional support, the physical support, and I wanted there to be a voice in the room and a person that I had a deep, close connection with that could be my advocate, knowing that when you do a hospital birth, which my first birth was a hospital birth, you don't know who's going to be on staff.
Yeah.
Like it's just whoever's there, rightfully so. But I was really wanting to have that comfort and security of a person that I knew.
Were you allowed to kind of Zoom her in, or like were there any compromises?
So yes, I could Zoom her in, except our hospital had horrific connection.
Oh, no.
So, so the Zoom didn't work, but we had her on the phone, and she stayed on the phone with us for 8.5 hours
Wow.
until we took a short break. And then things got crazy and we didn't have the time to pick up the phone to call her, but she was incredible. Doulas to me are incredible. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious how you even knew about doulas and why you chose a doula versus like a midwife or yeah. Yeah, I guess midwife would be the main other option.
yeah, well, remember, I'm a diligent student and I started I started doing a ton of research. For my first pregnancy, I was optimizing for safety and security, or
Hmm.
at least that's what I thought. And for me at that time, that felt like that's at a hospital.
Yeah.
So I chose a hospital that had midwives as
Hmm.
part of their process, as well as doctors. I knew myself and I knew that I would want to have someone there that could also connect with me emotionally
Yeah.
and be an advocate for me. And so when I learned about doulas, I was like, oh yeah, that's it. Like that sounds like that sounds like something that I want to have on my side.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious when you were pregnant, if the doula helped with anything like during pregnancy too. Like I feel like one of our like frequently viral topics is like red raspberry leaf tea or like the different sort of more holistic approaches that you could take to making your birth potentially easier. So yeah, how was your pregnancy and how did the doula kind of play a role there?
She was incredible. My pregnancy was fairly easy. And something I tell everybody is your pregnancy is easy, your postpartum most likely is going to be hard.
Yeah.
If your pregnancy is hard, your postpartum might be easier because you don't get both. Like
Yeah.
you're not spared from it. It's just when does it come and how hard. So my pregnancy was fairly easy and she was incredible. She would tell me I had heartburn, and instead of taking, stronger medication for it, she was like, go get papaya pills at Whole Foods, and papaya pills help with heartburn. Lo and behold, papaya pills help with heartburn.
Good tip.
It was really easy to follow. And so my iron levels were low, and she was just like, this is the type of iron supplement that you can take that's going to help and be easier for your digestion. So I did that. We talked about 5-finger eating and the different food groups and how to do that. And so she helped me with my nutrition, with my mental health. She would send me meditations, especially in that last month leading up to my birth, when we didn't know if my husband was going to be able to be in the room with me.
Yeah.
She sent me personalized meditations, which was so special to have that I was really grateful. And it was basically any concern that I had, she would help me through in a holistic way. Honestly, if that's the only thing she did and she wasn't in the birth room, that still would have been worth it.
I'm curious how your partner was involved too. How did your husband kind of play a role in choosing, like, even if you should have a doula, for instance, or like different birth decisions related to your birth plan?
He was very active, and I was very appreciative to it. He went to every appointment with me until he couldn't because of COVID. So
Yeah.
he went to every appointment. We did meet doulas in person. We would debrief. We met several doulas before we chose our doula. He did all the education prep. We talked through everything. That he was truly a partner in the process, which I'm so grateful for and wish for everyone, because it is partnership for sure.
Yeah. Would you also describe him as a good student?
He is a good student. For sure.
Okay.
Sometimes a little bit of a rebel, but like very diligent.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, did you give birth on your actual due date, or were there any sort of unexpected pieces of your birth plan or what you had anticipated your birth to be?
So, for my first birth, we were about 7 days late, and I was really trying to push it so my general philosophy, and this isn't for everyone, of course, but my general philosophy was low to no intervention. I did not want to have anything, and inclusive of during birth. My goal was to have no interventions.
So, no epidural.
No epidurals was my goal. Didn't necessarily hit that goal on the first one. Hit it on the second one, but not the first one. So that was my plan, and that was my approach to everything, was really mentally preparing for that. I didn't want to be induced, even though my son was quite late. When I went in to have his heart, to have the monitoring that happens when you pass your due date and you're a geriatric pregnancy, which means you're over 35, his heart rate was decelerating with my contractions. And so they said, like, I went in, my husband, again, couldn't be there because COVID. So he was in the parking lot with my mom, actually waiting for the appointment. And I called him up and I said, they're telling me that I need to go ahead and get into the labor and delivery ward of the hospital, like right now. Can you go home and get my hospital bag and come back? Because like, this is it. Like we're going. And I went into labor and delivery. I was having some contractions, and my husband ended up joining us. He brought the hospital bag. And honestly, the whole experience was pretty tumultuous from that moment on. And to put some context on it, like May 20th or May 19th, at that point, hospitals were understaffed.
Yeah.
Everyone was in a mask. I had to labor in a mask, and they were understaffed. And I'll say that I felt like I was optimizing for safety and security in that pregnancy. My second birth, I was optimizing for experience and more holistic support and care. And I did that outside of a hospital. And it was a night and day experience for me.
Interesting. So I'm curious why you wanted a low intervention birth and if that philosophy was kind of linked to like what led you to not do a hospital birth the second time around.
Yeah. So the more I learned during my process with my doula and just education in general, the more I felt capable and prepared and just more philosophically aligned with a more natural birth experience. If it was possible, there would
Yeah.
have been many reasons why it was not possible. And my first goal was always like safe baby, safe mom.
Yeah.
But if it was possible, I wanted to go that path because everything is a trade-off and everything has pros and cons. And potentially the pro of an epidural might present itself with other cons.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be able to optimize for having a natural birth, being able to move around the delivery room, feeling a connection to the process. And honestly, like maybe psychologically, in a strange way for me, like I was really excited by the challenge of having a natural birth. My mom had two natural births.
Mm.
Women have been having sorry, I shouldn't say natural, I should say unmedicated. So scratch that. Unmedicated birth. Women have been having unmedicated birth for years. It doesn't mean that they have to, but it is an option.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I was learning about it, the more compelled I was to try to have that experience for all the different reasons that were important to me, if possible.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned that your first birth was tumultuous. Why would you describe it as such?
So we checked into the hospital. I had chosen my hospital because they're supposed to have midwives on staff.
Mm-hmm.
When I got checked into labor and delivery, I asked them if I could go home and wait to labor there before my contractions started. And they told me that they would really not recommend it. And it was on me to make that decision, but that they would not. Uh, essentially a bad decision. So
Mm.
there's a lot of like, obviously that's a scary situation. So I was
Okay.
asking for more information. And this is something that my husband and I did through every step of the process, was like, we really wanted to hear pros and cons and fully understand the context of the situation instead of just follow through with what the medical staff was sharing with us. And so
Mm-hmm.
I asked to be evaluated by a midwife before I went into the labor and delivery unit. And they told me that I could only see a midwife if I admitted into the labor and delivery clinic. And I was in the triage. And I was like, well, I'd really like to see a midwife first to give me an assessment. They kept telling me you can only do that if you get admitted. But once you get admitted, you don't leave. So I agreed to it. I got admitted and I went in, and it was a 7 p.m. shift. And there was no midwife on that 7 p.m. shift.
Um,
And my heart broke and sank a million different times because I went into the room. I was waiting to see a midwife who I knew was going to be more aligned with my birth plan of an unmedicated birth. And they told me there was no one on call. And I was doing it at a teaching hospital, which I love in principle. But in practice, I was then faced with a situation where no one on the care team was fully aligned with my birth plan.
yeah.
And my doula was on the phone, not in person. And it was my first birth. So I was already had lots of fear and scared, and it was COVID and all of these things. And then we were left alone in our hospital room several times by the nurse. They were understaffed. And this is a long-winded story, but at the beginning of my birth, I felt strong and powerful. And like, again, there was a little bit of like excitement, to my contractions of like, I can handle this, I can power through this. And what I found really interesting by both my pregnancies is the contractions are painful.
Yeah.
Like, yes, they are painful for sure. I fully agree and support the pain that comes with labor. But actually, what is the most painful part is the fear that enters when you're not sure what's happening. And so with my son's birth, we were left alone. I started bleeding and not in not the right ways.
Yeah.
We asked for support. His heart rate was decelerating every time. I had to have monitors all over me. Every time there was a deceleration in his heart, 15 people would like come like running through the room, speaking to each other, not speaking to me, not letting me know what was going on, not putting context around, sometimes it's normal for that to happen, especially in boy babies. There's actually a correlation there. And there's only three types of ways in which there's three types of ways that the heart and the heart rate is impacted during labor. There's one that's like actually critical emergency, and the other two can be monitored to make sure that everything's okay. But anytime anyone came into the room, it was like fear, emergency, hectic, no communication. And that just doesn't feel very safe. And then there were several other things where I just didn't feel like I was being included or spoken to. They injected my thigh without communicating to me what was going on to stop my contractions. I didn't feel like I had an advocate in the room other than my husband, who was an incredible advocate. But until 7 a.m. that the shift changed and there was a midwife on staff who was really helping support my concept of an unmedicated vaginal birth. And it was a huge difference. And so there were many other things that happened and took place that my husband and I both thought that I was going to die. Like there were many things throughout the pregnancy there were many things throughout the delivery. And all it would have taken was for someone to tell me or my husband, you're not going to die. Everything's going to be okay. This is normal. This is what's happening. Or if things fall out of the range of normal, we're going to take you to the emergency room.
Yeah.
But even in my labor, my husband, who's an incredible partner, advocate, very strong, very vocal, at some point when things were a little bit calmer, went in the bathroom to cry because he was so like traumatized by the experience. And it didn't have to be that way is the problem, or my issue is it didn't have to be that way.
So during your second birth, like with that experience in mind, how did you think about staffing your birth? Like, did you have a midwife present at the second birth, and what setting was it in? If not a hospital, like was it at home, or did you opt for a birth center? How did you kind of structure it?
To put it into context, my first birth was at a hospital, one of the best hospitals in the country, also. Teaching hospital. I had, 12 appointments leading up to the birth. Post-birth, I had maybe one or two. I had a significant tear with my son. So the birth of my son, they basically told me, you have 10 minutes to push him out or you're going into the operating room.
Oh my gosh.
This is what I mean, the trauma.
Yeah.
So I pushed him out in under 10 minutes and it was at a cost to my body. But I pushed him out and it was so much so that the nurses in the hospital would come up to me after when they do my check in on me. And they're like, oh, you're the woman who pushed out their first child in less than 10 minutes. And I was just like, a prize that I didn't know about because not a prize that I wanted to win if this was
That's so strange. Why did they ask you to do that?
They thought that was the safest way it was basically, if I wanted to have a vaginal birth, I had to do it in a certain amount of time or they were going to take me
to do a C-section.
To do a C-section. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was my first birth. There was very little postpartum care.
Mm.
Sorry, there was like no postpartum care. It was also deep COVID. I have several distinct memories of postpartum calling the hospital and saying, I'm having these issues. I need someone to see me. I'm scared. I don't know what's happening. I don't think this is normal. I need help. And then telling me, like, I'm sorry, you can't come in. You're off. Like, you can go into the emergency room, but we can't take care of, like, there's no option. It's not safe. And just feeling so helpless
Yeah.
between breastfeeding and recovery. There was no support. And I was on the phone bawling with the nurse and saying, can someone please see me? I'm advocating for myself. You told me to advocate for myself. This is me advocating for myself. Help me. And there was no options provided to me through healthcare. I ended up having an incredible lactation consultant that did private work that came to my house. She was the only person that would come to my house. It was a big price tag out of pocket, which we can talk about the inequalities in care. Honestly, like at that moment felt like saved me in postpartum. So what that taught me was, and because I was a student and I had everything planned, everything ready, and my experience was so wild at the hospital and so
Yeah.
unsupportive, I was like, if I can do all of this planning and all of this work, and that got me this birth with this trauma, pain, and recovery,
Mm-hmm.
and then no support on the other side of it. My lesson is I have zero control over what happens at the birth of my baby, but
Yeah.
I can plan how I'm supported before that birth and how I'm supported after the birth. And
Mm.
so my first birth, I was optimizing for safety and security, or at least I thought, and my decision making came from a place of fear, but that birth left me and my partner traumatized. So for my second birth, I wanted to optimize from my experience. I wanted more holistic support and care. And I chose to do that at the San Francisco Birth Center, which I will sing praises to forever.
Yeah.
It was such an incredible experience working with them up until my birth, but then even more importantly, post birth, they came to my house to check on me 24 hours after my baby arrived, 48 hours after, 72 hours, and then it was 1 week and 2 week appointments.
Mm.
I came in after that, and it was incredible and such a difference. So that was the big shift for us. And I will tell you that my husband was still operating from a place of fear and didn't love the idea of a birth center, but we got him around to it. And in the end, he was just like, I will always recommend people to have birth at a birth center if you're normal pregnancy, safe,
Yeah.
all of the things that go with it.
Interesting. I'm curious if you think that you had your first experience because of like that I've heard a lot of sort of discourse around hospital versus birth center births, and midwifery as well, and just like how it's utilized so minimally in the US versus other countries. And I feel like some people have notions around like that's just the way that America trains their OBs, and like that's how like people view just like intervention and like see birth as an emergency. So I'm curious if you align with that, or if you feel like it was perhaps just a fluke because it was at a teaching hospital, it was deep COVID. Like, what do you think was the true root cause of why that happened, or like what could have been done to be prevented?
So many thoughts and opinions on this. And a lot
Yeah.
of them are spicy.
No, it's okay. I think that's makes for the best content.
So there's an expression about how, like, to a surgeon, everything needs to be an operation,
Yeah.
or whatever your specialty is, that's what your training is, and so that's what you are, that is the lens at which you look at the problem. which
Mm-hmm.
I think is very fair. Midwifery is such an underrated profession
Yeah.
that, for whatever reasons, was discredited at some point and replaced with a different medical system, which I don't necessarily believe puts the woman at the center of things. Like, even to the position of like, why do women give birth on their backs?
Mm-hmm.
It's so that the doctor has a better view of how the baby is coming out. That is not patient-centered care.
Yeah.
That is making it more convenient for the doctor, whereas midwifery, it is very, very led by patient-centered care, baby-centered care. And
Yeah.
also, they are experts in birth. So
Mm-hmm.
for my son's birth, part of the claim was that his heart rate was decelerating because the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck.
Mm.
My husband was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, which his mother had to have an emergency C-section to remove. So my husband had trauma from stories he had been told his whole life, that he almost died because the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck.
Yeah.
With the work that we did with our doula and midwives, they explained to us that that doesn't actually matter because you're not breathing from air yet.
Mm-hmm.
So if the cord is wrapped around your neck, that's actually not a problem, or it's very rarely a problem. It's actually quite normal for that to happen. And I experienced that with my second birth. So with
Mm.
my daughter, her umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck. I was giving birth to her, and I heard the midwife say, the umbilical cord is wrapped around her neck. A second later, she said, it's off. She just, I don't know, flicked it off, took it off, moved it off, whatever she
Yeah.
did, where in a different because she's done that a million times. And it is so common for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many different ways in which midwives are prepared to handle a situation without operations, because
Right.
they don't have a surgical, like there's not an operating room nearby. They don't have that. So they are able to solve problems through deep area expertise and knowledge in childbirth.
Yeah.
So I personally would wish for every woman to be able to have a birth like my second birth. That birth healed me. It restored my connection to my own intuition and my own internal power that
Yeah.
now every day like walks alongside me, because I know that I can do it even though it's hard. And that was not what my first birth was like. My first birth was, I had fear, I doubted my intuition, it shook my self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, could it have been because it was my first birth, and first births are tougher than second births? Absolutely. Do I also feel I would have had a much better experience had I been at the San Francisco Birth Center for my first birth? Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. I'm curious if for your second birth you still sought out like the low intervention birth plan. Did you have an epidural or like any type of intervention? And also, did you have an epidural for the first one?
I did have an epidural for the first one because many reasons. I was very scared.
Yeah.
And there's also like mechanical parts to it as to why I ended up choosing it, but I chose it. I don't regret it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
regret choosing it. I was always of the mindset like, I will try to have an unmedicated birth, and if not, I'm also okay and going to give myself grace for whatever decision I make in the moment. And so I made that decision. I don't regret it. It was super helpful. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I'm at peace with it. My second birth, I had an unmedicated birth. It was honestly incredible. Like, it sounds so cheesy and corny. It was incredible. And my birth was less painful than breastfeeding. Like, um, it was actually I gave birth in a tub. I was surrounded with a midwife, her apprentice, my doula, her apprentice, and my husband. My daughter was born to This Girl Is on Fire.
That's so
uh,
funny.
it was a great song, a great time. And it's hard to manage contractions through, like, without unmedicated, without, an epidural. And a funny story that my doula will say is one of her favorite parts of my birth was I had created like this very zen mix for early birth.
Yeah.
And it was like Tibetan bowls, like very like spiritual, I'm one with the world.
Yeah.
And when we got to the birth center, my husband like very diligently like started to put on these like Tibetan bowl songs. And I looked at him and I was like, the time for Tibetan bowls has come and gone. I need something with like upbeat tempo and lyrics so that
Yeah.
I can distract myself. Um,
So what was your favorite song? Was it The Girl on Fire?
Probably This Girl Is on Fire.
Oh yeah.
That was what was on when she was coming out. And so
Yeah.
it was appropriate in more ways than one.
Yeah, that's so sweet. Okay, awesome. So I guess I'm curious. I know you mentioned you did a tub birth, but what positions did you birth in? Did you have sort of a preference for certain positions over the other? I know you mentioned giving birth on your back as not being optimal. And actually, I recently read an article about there's like a conspiracy that people think that it originated with Louis XIV, who actually had a fetish for viewing birth on their back.
I mean,
Yeah, but also the physician convenience.
yeah. So because I ended up getting an epidural for my first birth, I was on my back. I labored lots of different ways. And of course, like my first labor was around 34 hours. Uh,
Hmm.
my second labor was super quick, actually. And like very grateful for it. But so I had a big tear for my first birth and I was traumatized by it and
Right.
very scared. And so for my second birth, I mean, my husband told me, like, if you don't want to have any more kids after our first birth, he was like,
Uh-huh.
I totally get it. uh, and because I was very clear that I wanted to have more than one, I worked through that trauma with my doula to get into a mental headspace to have a second. And so a big fear for me was tearing again. And
Hmm.
so I was looking at any position that would reduce me tearing.
Right.
And so that was in the tub and I was on my hands and knees and it was a really incredible experience. There was a few moments where I got very scared
Hmm.
because some of the things that happened in my first birth were reappearing. And I
Mm.
told my birth team that I told them two things. Like, one, please tell me as often as you can that I'm not going to die. Like, I need to help. I need to hear you tell me that I'm not going to die.
Mm.
And do not have conversations like I'm not there. Speak to me directly. I don't care how scary the content is. I don't care, like, whatever it is. I will I will not react well to people speaking about me like I am not present. So
Yeah.
speak to me and let me make the decision that I feel is right for
Hmm.
me, irrespective of how scary you might think it will be. And so I was in the tub and some things that were happening in my first birth started happening and I was getting very scared. And that's when the pain became uncontrollable.
Hmm.
And my doula came to me, put her hand on my shoulder, and just said, the fear is coming. You are okay. You're not going to die. You're almost at the end. You're in transition. So she named it. She's like, you're in transition.
Hmm.
You're almost there. You are safe. And like a light switch, it was just like, I can keep doing this from a place of, I'm going to die. I
Yeah.
can keep doing this. And so I really, in my experience, the pain becomes uncontrollable because of the fear,
Mm,
not because the pain is not tolerable.
right. Wow, super insightful. One aspect of your birth plan that I wanted to chat about was the decision to bank cord blood. And it's interesting. I didn't know you did a water birth. So yeah, I guess I'd love to get your take on what drove you to bank cord blood stem cells with Anja Health, and also how your experience was, especially not in a hospital setting per se, and with a water birth, because I feel like people kind of perceive water births as like scary and messy, and I think it might definitely be messy, but maybe not messier than a non-water birth.
I mean, everything of birth is messy.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, if you just wanted to share a bit about that.
Yeah, I wish that I would have done cord blood banking with my first birth. And so I was actually really disappointed that I wasn't able to do that. Also, my son's birth, which was my first birth, was more in the emergency realm. So like
Yeah.
I didn't get to see my placenta. There was no waiting for the blood to go to the baby. Like it was an emergency, like we got to get him out and all of
Right.
that. So that was just different. And I didn't know about Anja Health at that point. So I couldn't do it. But as soon as we met you and I found out what you were doing, I was like, I 100% want to do this for my second birth. Um, as an insurance policy, as a safety net, you know, some of the things that you learn is just how special the body is. And, you know, the placenta being created, the stem cells, everything that happens around birth is honestly somewhat of a miracle. Like
Yeah.
my experience of pregnancy and creating life is like there's so much science there, and there is some incredible miracles that happen. And capturing what you can from that very rare moment in time, if that can help you or your family or your loved ones later in life, is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so
Yeah.
for me, being able to do that, and my experience with you all was so easy. Like there was a pamphlet that I filled out, shared with the birth team. And it was the first time that they had been doing something specifically like that. They read through the materials, they asked me questions. I think you all at that time too, like did a good job of like either sending an email, or there was some reminder of like, make sure you've sent this to your team so that they had it ahead of time as
Yeah.
well. And then we took the box along with like whatever I took, my birth bag, and it was all there and very easy. I think it would have been even easier at a hospital because the birth centers close. Like hospitals are always open.
Hmm.
Birth centers, if it's outside of office hours, are closed and then open up for the birth and then close again. So my team followed all the instructions, put everything in the box, and then we just took the box home with us when we were done. And the thing about having an unmedicated birth, one of the pros to it is you're like, you're actually extremely functional right away because you don't have any medication. So like you leave the birth center 4 hours or less after giving
Yeah.
birth.
Did you feel a certain kind of high, like that's frequently described after an unmedicated birth?
I felt amazing. Like it was the best drug. Like high, high oxytocin. Um,
Yeah.
and I was so shocked at how good I felt. I do not recommend doing what I did, but I was so shocked that I felt so good and
Mhm.
so like healthy and not, you know, crippled or anything, that we came home. And when my son, who was 2 years old, woke up in the morning, I picked him up, which is wild. And nobody should do that, like at all.
Yeah.
But I was feeling so good. I was just like, I can even pick him up. I didn't just give birth 12 hours ago. And then my husband was like, what are you doing? Put down our 20-pound son. You're not supposed to be picking
Yeah.
anything up. But we brought the box home. We called the number. They picked it up. Like it was so easy. And so I was really grateful for that experience.
Okay, amazing. Well, yeah, I appreciate that you did it. It was such a coincidence. It was that we met like while you were pretty far along in your pregnancy. And I kind of felt like fundraising was almost a lead gen tool because I it was pretty much like every like one in probably 8 meetings, the VC was like pregnant or like had someone that they knew that was pregnant. So yeah, that was funny. Awesome. Well, I'd love to conclude by chatting about your postpartum. I know you mentioned like your breastfeeding journey in particular was really difficult and that like if you have a good birth, you may not have a good postpartum. So yeah, what was your typical routine like after birth and what surprised you the most about your postpartum period?
Oh man. Okay. So typical routine after birth, I actually created the anti to-do list,
Okay.
which was really important for me because I am very much a like get things done person, put a lot on my plate, do
Yeah.
and postpartum is all about rest and recovery.
Hmm.
And it's actually so important that you do that
Yeah.
while
No
also,
up sons.
yes, while also keeping a human alive. So I created an anti to-do list just so I could really shift my mindset to this new reality, which was really difficult to do. And then I put the expectation for myself early days, like if I'm able to brush my teeth, do 2 to 3 sitz baths, and take a shower, it was an accomplished day for
Yeah.
me. While also, of course, feeding a human every 1 to 2 hours around the clock with no sleep, which is the part that like is missed of just how intense that is. uh,
Yeah.
so that was the typical routine for me for the first couple weeks. And that permission of like, you are in survival mode.
Yeah. So you mentioned you had a birth doula. Did you have postpartum doulas too, or did your doula care kind of carry over?
My doula care in both instances had some postpartum check-ins. And
Okay.
also my doula did a really beautiful ceremony of like kind of a closing ceremony to birth. But my postpartum care was mostly managed by the midwives who came and did all the checkups and made sure everything was going well. I had a chat with them. So literally like they were chatting with me on how things are going. Anytime there was any issue, I would get like a 4 hour response rate of like whatever was happening. So it was
Yeah.
mainly driven by my midwives.
Okay. Amazing. So what surprised you most about the postpartum period?
How unbelievably hard and demanding it is to rest, recover, and keep another human alive.
Mm,
And just doing those things. I think also you're so incredibly sleep deprived. So you're so incredibly sleep deprived, yet you're still functional. And like you feel like, how are those two statements true?
yeah.
So that was another piece of it that was very surprising to me.
Yeah. I'm curious if you had, so I know you mentioned you had the check-ins. Did you have anyone else that was really integral, like a night nurse or even like other family members? And what sort of role did they play? And also what aspects of what they did for you did you appreciate the most? Because I feel like a common topic of controversy is like that people will just come over and like hold the baby and not contribute anything.
Yes, yes. So I'm a planner.
Yeah.
And what I did was I made a chore chart in Notion.
Okay, cool.
So part of my planning, I had birth principles over a birth plan. So like generally what I wanted. And then post birth, I had like a baby home to do chart.
Hmm.
And that was probably the most helpful thing for me and my family. So I had my husband, my toddler, and my mom came and stayed with us for about 6 weeks, or a little bit more than 6 weeks. And so in my chore chart that I made, that is going to make me sound very type A,
No,
and
I
that
think it's cool. It's a common thing. I like a lot of doulas that I've chatted with will make chore charts for the families they support.
it's honestly like critical. And so we listed all the chores of the house and we did it as a family, kind of like you would do financial planning or whatever. We listed all the chores and then we had it in stages. So, like the first 2 weeks, the first 6 weeks. And then when my mom left, how would that work be shared amongst
Yeah.
the rest of us? And so it was anything from take out the trash to change the diapers to feed the baby, which was my responsibility. And that was so helpful. And I also made it very clear to my mom and to any family member that wanted to help that if you're coming to help, I'm very grateful and thankful. And this is the type of help that I would appreciate. So like bringing food, doing the laundry, watching my son, giving him love and attention so he's not jealous of his little sister, which luckily he was not. But that's the help that I want. And then I'm happy for you to hold the baby and get all the snuggles and love when I'm in the shower at like this
Yeah.
specific time.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good tip. So you mentioned that breastfeeding was difficult. What in particular made it hard, and what do you think made it better?
My breastfeeding journey both times was so tough. It was more painful to me than my birth. And I probably had everything that can happen, everything that can go wrong during breastfeeding went wrong for me.
Yeah.
And it's just so demanding. I spoke to many people, and my husband's mom is a lactation consultant in the
That's so
UK.
lucky.
Yes, it was very lucky. And she told me there are some people there are some magical mythical creatures who have no problems breastfeeding, but it's rare. Everyone has some sort of complication or issue. So with my son, he had a lip tie and a tongue tie. And we had to navigate that during COVID, which was difficult because, again, we couldn't take him anywhere. It went undiagnosed for 2.5 months, which is a really long time. Because he had a tongue tie, I had all sorts of complications that were extremely painful as a result.
Yeah.
And then with my daughter, it was also just similar but different types of complications. I ended up getting mastitis, which was like really intense experience. And I am blessed and supported that I could reach out to lactation consultants to help me navigate it. But I spoke to several lactation consultants. Like, it wasn't like my husband's mom's a lactation consultant, and she couldn't even help me with some of the issues. I had to go to other specialists, and I ended up, because I'm extremely stubborn and I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to other women. I kind of wish that I'd stopped breastfeeding sooner, if I'm fully honest. I think being a mother, working full time and breastfeeding when it's difficult killed me a little bit, like killed me. But with both of my kids, I went a year.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I'm stubborn and stupid.
No, I mean, I feel like, I feel like it tends to align with like the parents that I've chatted with that like desire low intervention births and things like this. So it totally makes sense. But you're the longest breastfeeding guest that we've had. Everyone else has said, we've only had a couple parents, but everyone else has said like 4 months or like 6 months. So yeah, kudos to you.
Kudos to them for stopping when it felt right instead of just being stubborn.
Yeah. I'm curious what your favorite moment was in postpartum, since we chatted about your struggles.
Yeah. So there's these moments the first couple weeks post birth, and sometimes they last the first couple months, where this like little delicious little thing that you've created that's like so squishy and like looks sometimes cute, sometimes a little weird, curls up like a little kitty cat on you and like makes you like these little kitty cat noises. And that was, with both of my kids, my favorite, where they would just lay on me and make these like little, I used to call them kitty cat noises.
Sweet.
And those moments are once in a lifetime.
Yeah, that's
because they
amazing.
never stay still like that again.
Yeah. My last question around postpartum is how did your partner play a role in your routine? Did you have any specific structures around like how you split responsibilities, especially since you breastfed for so long?
Yes. I'm very blessed. My partner is very hands-on. And while nothing will ever be 50-50,
Hmm.
because that's not possible, things ebb and flow. We were very good about being aware of that. And so I handled all the feeding, but he handled all the diaper changes. And so what really helps me navigate parenting in general is calling out, like, I'm the default parent for this, you're the default parent for that. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that like I never change a diaper, although
Hmm.
that would be nice. It just means he's the default. And
Yeah.
I know that that's being taken care of. And one of the most helpful things when you have a million things on your mind is knowing that you get to remove or delete one thing from your mind. And so the chore chart helped with that. And he helped with it a lot also. We also did he read a book and we would read it together actually. It's like dad, I'll send you the link, but it's like a parenting book for dads or something. It's a man who is is illustrating like what's happening for the partner in these moments.
Yeah.
And I found that really supportive so that he could understand this is what's happening for me in this moment, and build that empathy for what was going on. With a second child, the majority of his work on top of changing diapers was like he was the default for my son,
Mm.
because just practically like I was feeding my daughter. And so we tried to figure out what are we default parents in, and tasks on. Um, and also it's just so hard. Like the first year, it's not the first 2 weeks or the first 6 weeks, like they like to tell you. Or I remember people being like, oh, after the first 12 weeks, like everything just gets easier. And I'm like, 12 weeks came and went, and where is the easier? Because it has not arrived. Like it is
Yeah.
still really hard. But I'd say if you go into it knowing that the first year is really tough and you're going to have regressions on all sorts of things, uh,
Yeah.
and then build the support system that's going to help you for a year or
Hmm.
more. But like that first year is really tough.
Okay, makes sense. That's a good framework. Okay, cool. Well, my last sort of segment is around parenting. I know your kids are somewhat younger, so you may not have delved too deep into it, but I'm curious if you have any philosophies on parenting that you feel really strongly about. Like I know gentle parenting tends to be pretty popular, although I see a lot of discourse on it on social media, and none of our guests have known what gentle parenting is. But I know
I've heard
Alexis
of it.
knows because he told me that like he introduced me to Dr. Becky, who's like the gentle parenting like Olympian. So
She is an Olympian. I agree. I
yeah.
agree. I have her book. I think my first main thought on parenting in general is actively leaving space or making space for your partner to be able to step into that role.
Mm,
I think there's this myth or concept that like a mother knows best, and maybe she does, or maybe she just gets there first and
yeah.
figures it out. I think it's really important to leave space for each other
Mm.
so that both parents are getting a chance to figure it out and get there first versus it just being the mother.
What does it mean to you to be a good parent, and what's your favorite part?
I'd say what it means to me to be a good parent is to ensure that my child doesn't need me, but wants to have me around.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that. What's your favorite part about being a parent?
There are so many things that I love. It's really hard. And there are so many things that I love. Looking just so one, the love and connection that you have with your child that grow, like what's actually special about it is it grows as they grow,
Hmm.
which is kind of mind blowing. Like for me, it was like, yes, when I was with my son, I had love for him when he was an infant and a newborn, and same for my daughter. But I love them more today than I did when they were babies and just coming home. And watching them develop and grow and interact with the world is so special. Like it
Yeah.
restores that magic and that childlike joy that you have. Playing with them is so special. So, and this like very grave responsibility that you have of helping them navigate the world is kind of wild. Like their experiences are going to be impacted in how you react to things. And so like really keeping a safe space for the fact that like they're watching you. And so how do you want to show up?
Is there anything that you think new parents should know in general?
It's really fucking hard. It's just I think it's especially hard in the society that we live in today where we don't have villages. And I find it very obnoxious to hear people say it takes a village, but then there is no village. Like,
Yeah.
and actually I think the most important part for that is villages no longer organically exist.
Hmm.
You need to build it, cultivate it, ask for it, pay for it, however you are going to do it. It's on you to figure it out, because it doesn't, for the majority of people, it doesn't actually exist anymore.
Yeah.
And the need is still there. Like you still need the village, whether it exists or not. So how are you going to create this support system for you and your partner and your children, for your family, so that you all can get through it? Because if your child is a good sleeper, they're not going to be a good eater. If they're a good eater, they're not going to be a good sleeper. Like
Yeah.
you don't, nothing is going to be perfect all the time. Actually, you're going to pay for it someplace. Uh,
Yeah.
and so you really need to create a support system so that you can get through how difficult it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. The CDC published a piece this year that basically like 4 in 5 maternal deaths are preventable, and like they essentially say that the leading cause is just mental health issues. And so one of the solutions and a lot of like responses to that was just having like some semblance of community, even if it's just like a Facebook group. Like when Nicole and Ben were on, she was saying that she just had a group chat with like 2 moms, and that was like everything to her. So yeah, I feel like community is super important.
Super important. And also especially the early days when things are going wrong, and or hopefully they're not going wrong.
Yeah.
But even Facebook groups for moms. I joined a breastfeeding Facebook group. I joined another moms group, and I don't typically join Facebook groups, and they were like pivotal. Like talk about like missionaries who are there to support you. You'll see
Yeah.
like a mom take a picture of her baby's rash and be like, does anyone know what this is? And you'll have 30 comments within an hour of like, it
Yeah.
could be this, try this natural homeopathic, like whatever it is. But yeah, community is huge.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, that's all the questions that I have. I know I took up a lot of your time, but I really appreciate you being here today. And yeah, your frameworks are really special. And yeah, I just appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your story.
Thank you for making the space, and it was a pleasure. And thank you for really helping more people get access to stem cells.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you know, if there's something that I learned about the healthcare system as a very privileged human being who can navigate it,
Mhm.
is even being a self advocate for myself, obviously, or being an advocate for myself and navigating the system, it was really tough, which means I
Yeah.
cannot even imagine the experience of others. And so any way that we can improve that, I think is huge.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.